Hi, welcome. Thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today to talk a little bit about specially designed instruction. We're happy that you're here. I hope it's at least a little sunny where you are. It is not where I am. So hopefully you are somewhere in the state that's getting a little bit of sunshine right now because we all sure need it. All right, it is 3 o'clock exactly where I am, probably 4 o'clock for most of you. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Again, welcome to Practices to Support All Learners. This is session 4, Specially Designed Instruction. And again, we're so happy to have you here because we know that these are practices that benefit all students in our classrooms and especially our most vulnerable population. So thank you so much for being here to learn with us. Today's learning objectives, we are going to be working specifically on specially designed instruction. We'll call it SDI throughout the presentation. We'll look at considerations for planning and implementing SDI. I think you're going to really love the planning matrix that we'll talk about a little later, and look at examples of possible SDI strategies that you can use for quick implementation in your classrooms and with your students. Finally, we're going to look deeply into some case scenarios and brainstorm how we can apply and implement SDI for the students in our case scenarios. So thank you for joining us today, and we'll go ahead and really dig in. This is the fourth version or the fourth session in our series. So I did just you already are pretty familiar with the IEPTA Center, but please do remember that we have lots of services available to support you, and all of our services are free of charge. You have a Padlet that you can access information about SDI. You can use the QR code or you can use the link. And if one of my colleagues will throw that in the chat, I would appreciate it. Our Padlet does have great things on there like handouts and PowerPoints. We also have links to resources such as books, videos, and articles that will help you dig a little deeper into the research and into some of these best practices we'll discuss today. All right, so let's dig in. What is SDI, Specially Designed Instruction? Um, First and foremost, it is definitely a law that we are following to a T in order to make strides for all students. What year was SDI put into place? Take a moment and think about what you know about SDI, and if you'll put an answer into the chat for us. If you'll put a number 1 if you think it was 1995, 2 for 2004, 3 for 1975, or 4 for 2011. So tell us, when do you think SDI became a law? I see some great guesses. I see some guesses on 1995. I see Alana said it's older than her. She thinks it's older than her. I love it. And a guess for 1975. So thank you for your participation. I appreciate that. So as we get into it, the law for SDI was put into place a long, long time ago. Alana's right. Before she was born, 1975 is when that was. Yeah, she'll enjoy that that's recorded, right? Before Alana was born, SDI became part of law. And we look at in the government or the law is that they say that it is a federal law and it's defined as adapting the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of the child that results from a child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general education curriculum. And when we look at that, that's why SDI is part of the student's IEP because it's what makes their instruction special and different from their peers. As we look at Indiana's Article 7, so we looked at the federal version of the law. What you see on the screen now is Indiana's wording for the law. Indiana's Article 7 defines SDI as adapting as appropriate to the needs of the student who is eligible for special education and related services, the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction. Again, you see that common ground between the two pieces in order to address the unique needs of students' disability and ensure their access to that general education curriculum. So both of those pieces, that both laws, both the federal and state law, really focus on the changes that we are making to the content, methodology, or delivery of instruction and how they're meeting the students' needs and how we're pushing them to access the general education curriculum. So all of those components go into our specially designed instruction, which is why it's something that is so important in those IEPs that it's written and written well so that we can support students in that way. When you think about SDI in context, it's important to remember that just because a student receives specially designed instruction doesn't mean that they miss out on other services that are available. First and foremost, our students with IEPs are general education students first. So if you look at the graphic on the screen, it really shows how SDI fits into the bigger system of support that students are offered. So what we know is that within the general education curriculum, all students benefit from that universal design for learning. All of the choice that we can embed into our instruction and some of the other inclusive and the best practices we've discussed thus far in this series, all of those things are part of universal design and can be put into the tier one part of our instruction in our classrooms. As we go through the rings of the circle, we get we get more specialized in what we do. And so you'll notice differentiated instruction is going to benefit students with their unique needs, not necessarily identified disabilities or special education services, but differentiated instruction is how we're making those changes to help all students access that content and supporting their needs. We also have multi-tiered systems of support, your MTSS, those different tiers that address individual student needs and put resources and extra support in place to support students who are struggling or who need that extra challenge. The most inner circle there, especially designed instruction, that is because it applies to the fewest students in most schools. That's the centerpiece. They get not just their SDI, but also still access to multi-tiered systems of support, differentiated instruction, and universal design for learning. So we're adding on continuous layers of support, not removing students from supports that are already benefiting them. All right, and then this is where I turn it over to Katie, right? Sorry. Let me know if you want me to click through.
You're good. All right, so let's jump in and we'll talk a little bit about deeper into specially designed instruction. And Alana put in the chat that specially designed instruction is what makes special education special. And so if our students didn't need specially designed instruction, then they would not need special education services. So we talked about in the definitions that Niki went through with us, we talked about the three areas where SDI can be applied, and that is to the content, to the methodology, and to the delivery of instruction. So let's take a look at each of these three pieces and break them down and discuss what sorts of supports and services could fall under each one. So let's take a look at content. So when we look at what it is like to adapt our content, and if you're just hopping in, so welcome, glad you're here. I am curious if those of you who have access to the chat, if you could tell us if you're a general education teacher or a special education teacher. I think that knowing that helps guide just a little bit about how we talk through some of these things. And maybe we have a mixture of both educators in this training, and that's okay. Actually, that's wonderful. It's better than okay. Um, but if you come from a general education background, I think that sometimes, and I say, and I'm going to talk about the gen ed teachers because I bring that general education background to our team. So my years of teaching were in the general education setting, and I didn't quite always understand the connections and why we needed different areas of SDI and what they ultimately could do and how I could actually play a role in delivering that. So our specially designed instruction is always going to be tied to a goal that a student has in their IEP. So that is something that we should consider as we think through specially designed instruction. And if you come from a gen ed background, that might just be a piece that you're missing. I know that was a piece that I was missing my first few years of teaching for sure. I just didn't quite get that connection. So when we talk about adapting the content, um, we're talking about changing something that the student is being taught. And it is so important as we move through these different areas that we always reflect on the learning objective or the student goal, what it is that we're looking at for the student to master as we consider specially designed instruction. And that'll make more sense here in just a few moments, but I just have to throw that caveat out there. So we know that our students with disabilities are expected to master the same standards as classmates without disabilities. So it's not just being exposed to the same standards, but the law tells us that our students with special education services must master those same standards. But we can often master standards through different ways. So we have this really firm goal that we need to meet, but we have flexible paths to reaching that. And so oftentimes we can make some adjustments. We might be able to change the order in which something is taught. We may be able to change the level of complexity. And this is where sometimes SDI can get tricky. And this is where we'll really talk about what is the standard or the goal that is expected to be mastered, because we can adjust the level of complexity with certain situations, but it might also include additional skills needed to master grade level content. So those are some things we're going to think about as we move into the next slide. So when we think about what we can adjust in terms of content, we could use an alternate text. So again, this will be the third time I've said it, so it's important and it's going to be on the big test at the end of this presentation. But we have to look at our learning objective. If our learning objective is reading comprehension on grade level, our hands are really tied when it comes to an potentially alternate text or changing the lexile of a text. If our students are being assessed on grade level reading, then our content needs to reflect grade level reading. But sometimes we can use an alternate text. So we might be able to use different text that would teach the same thing, but maybe they're on different topics. Maybe we could use a text that used a different lexile. So if I'm in an 8th grade social studies class and I need to have my students read a text related to the formation of the Constitution. I think I got that right. 8th grade standards, American history, crossing my fingers. But the standard doesn't say that the students have to read a grade level text about the Constitution. It might just say that they need to be looking at resources and content that discuss the formation of the Constitution. So within that particular standard or within my particular learning goal, I don't have to necessarily use a grade level text in order for my students to learn about the Constitution. So those are some things that I can consider. I could also consider changing the order of the content. Sometimes it's easier for students to jump around in the standard or really the text that we're looking at. Maybe some parts make more sense to teach before we teach a part that's actually listed in the book earlier. we do this really based on our learners. So sometimes this is a reaction to what we know about our learners when we make this adjustment. So we can do this even when it's not specially designed instruction. Maybe we can eliminate sections. We know that a lot of times when we're delivering content, there's so much information to be delivered, but we really need to take a look at what are the most important pieces of content that need to be delivered with our students. And maybe we can leave out some of the finer details. Oftentimes, too, when it comes to content, we have to consider that expanded core curriculum that could be used to address some more compensatory skills. So something like the use of Braille, maybe it's some extra mobility training or even learning sign language for students. We can build that in to the content piece. So if there are questions about adapting the content, please be sure to throw those in the chat. I sometimes feel like these things can be as clear as mud. So please ask questions that will help us just to have a deeper reflection on the content as well. So adapting methodology is the second area of specially designed instruction. And this really looks at us as the teacher adapting how the students are being taught. And when we think about it, these are things that really good teachers just do. But our students with special education services, they may have it in their IEP that says this is how they need to be taught. And that was created by that team who knows the student best. Um, but this is looking at different instructional methods that we might use, different strategies, different interventions, and different techniques that we can use with our students. And I just want to throw a caveat out there that as we are writing IEPs for our students and we are writing these pieces of specially designed instruction, we don't want to say the name of like a specific program or a specific intervention in that specially designed instruction piece. And I think we get into this later, so I don't want to steal too much thunder, but really this is explaining how the student is being taught. So always keep that in mind too when we're thinking about SDI. We're not just naming a curriculum or naming an intervention. Rather, we are describing how the student is going to be taught. So we know that there are some specific methodologies that are more likely than others to help students become successful. We know that we have both research-based strategies and interventions and evidence-based strategies and interventions. And some are more effective and efficient for students with disabilities than others. And so it's important that we consider those. And I know later on in the training, we're going to talk about where we can find some of those resources. This is the most common area where we see elements of specially designed instruction within our students' IEPs. And I'm just wondering, do you have an idea why that might be? I don't know the answer to that, and I don't know that really anyone does know the answer to that. But I think it's interesting that the methodology or how we are teaching our students is the area that is most commonly mentioned within students' IEPs. So just some different examples when we think about specially designed instruction, we might have direct explicit instruction built into that SDI piece. We know that direct and explicit instruction are very effective for students with disabilities. John Hattie's work talks a lot about direct and explicit instruction. And he goes into great detail about actually separating the two of them. And he talks about direct instruction, and then he talks about explicit instruction, because there are some differences. But in general, when we think about the instruction that we deliver to our students, it does need to be direct and explicit. And it's good for students even without disabilities. Our students just need direct, explicit instruction. I know Alana threw something in the chat that I want to share. She said, as a teacher, I think about how I can change my delivery to students. And maybe that is why I think about methodology first. And I agree. I think that's a great thought, Alana, because we're always thinking about how to get them to learn the content. And it seems like that's something that we can control. We do control the others. However, when it comes to the delivery, that's us, right? We can use modeling. So we've got, we might use peer models. We might use adult models. We might use modeling that doesn't even look like that, right? Like the students can see different models. They can see different concepts modeled out. So that whole idea of modeling is really wide, and there are many different ways that we can do it. Chaining is another fantastic concept that we can use. We have two different types of chaining. We have forward chaining and backward chaining. So when we think about forward chaining, we think about really mastering step one before we move on to step two. And then we get step two mastered, and then we're on to step three. Some concepts, a lot of math concepts, we really think that of that forward chaining. We have to master single digit addition before we can move into that double digit addition. Backward chaining is a little different because we start at the end, and then we kind of teach the end, and then we back up and teach a little bit more and get the students successful on those before we actually teach the very beginning. This is something that I would often do with all of my students when we talked about how to write an introductory paragraph for an essay. Oftentimes if you're an English teacher out there, you know this too, but when we would try to get our students to write an essay that needed like a thesis statement, we would really start with explaining what a thesis statement is and why it's important. And really the thesis statement is that last sentence in the introduction. And so we would write that thesis statement first. We might give the students an introduction and the different pieces that go in there, the hook, list some reasons, and then they would have to write the thesis based on that intro part that we give them. And then we can go back and then we start to teach, okay, here's how you lay out the steps to your introduction. And you're going to talk about, here your say your three topics that you're going to cover in your three body paragraphs. So we're going to write those, and then we'll put the thesis statement at the end, and then we'll write the hook last. So that's just an idea of how backward chaining might work. And then task analysis is really breaking down tasks step by step and really following, this is the order of first, second, third, and so on. Sometimes with task analysis, we overcomplicate it. Task analysis can start something as simple as first we do this, and then we do this. So if we have a student who struggles with transitions, we're not going to start with introducing, oh, you're in middle school, here are your 8 transitions that you will encounter in the day. We're probably going to say something like first breakfast and then English. We do that so well with our elementary and younger learners, but sometimes in middle school and high school, we forget about that. And so really breaking those tasks down and then building on them once our students master them. So just some examples of methodology. We have that intensive phonemic awareness instruction. And when I say that, a lot of elementary ears perk up and start to name certain intervention strategies that we know. But again, rather than saying in our SDI, we're going to use X intervention, we would want to describe it. We would want to describe it as an intensive phonemic awareness instruction strategy where we will work on X, Y, and Z. We may work on blending sounds into blending three sounds into a word or three sound parts into a word, however you want to talk about it. Sometimes we can build in those multi-sensory methods. So just those ways that we know our students can learn, but instead of just like hearing it, maybe they're hearing it and seeing it read to them. Or maybe they're hearing a lesson and then they're seeing the instructor modeling something as they're going about it. So we're kind of pulling in a couple of those different elements of good teaching that we can use. Maybe we're using some alternate math strategies as well. Not all of our learners can learn with one set way. So maybe we need to think creatively and get some of those alternative math strategies that we know are evidence and research based that assist our learners with disabilities, especially those with math disabilities, because I know it's just frustrating having a child with a math disability. It's so hard as a parent to watch your child struggle when teachers only have one way to teach math, when we know that there are multiple methods that we can use. All right, so there's methodology. Again, if you have questions or comments about methodology, please feel free to throw those into the chat. And so the last is the delivery of instruction. So this really looks at when and where the students are taught. So this is that instructional context piece. And we have different ways that we can look at this. One is location. So general education classrooms is where we are hoping that we can service most of our students. We would love for our students' least restrictive environment to be the general education setting, but we know that sometimes there may be that need for pull-out minutes for more direct services or resource minutes or something like that. So that's one thing that we can consider when we talk about where the students are being taught. Another thing that we can look at is the group size. So maybe there's a whole group, like a large class. And so we've got a whole group lesson in the gen ed class or whole group instruction in the gen ed class. We might have large group instruction, small group. Now, the law doesn't really define for us what constitutes small group and large group. So these can vary by district and they can even vary by school. So just keep that in mind as you're creating this. The more sometimes we can write into our SDI that a small group may be defined as 3 to 4 students or 2 to 3 students. Sometimes we can get that individual one-on-one support, and sometimes it's just more independent. All things that we can consider when we're looking at specially designed instruction. And then we can look at the dosage. So this is just the amount of time needed for students that a student may need to achieve a goal. So here we're looking at things like pre-teaching and reteaching. So again, we might get some of these kind of piggybacking on each other. Maybe in a small group setting, a student will be pre-taught vocabulary words for science at the beginning of each week or at the beginning of each homeroom. Maybe that's what their homeroom time is going to look like, is that they're going to spend it having this pre-teach time of something very specific. Maybe it's reviewing math facts or previewing the math lesson for the upcoming day. So location, group size, and dosage. Some other instructional techniques that we might use, and I bet all of us have used these in our classroom, are different learning strategies like acronym-based learning strategies. In math, we have PEMDAS, parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. Alana threw in yes, ma'am. So we've got an English example too. So we know that acronyms help our students. They help them to recall the information. It's not like a cold recall, but rather it's a trigger that's like, oh yes, I do know this. Um, some just different multisensory instructions that we might be able to use, touch math. Sometimes, although we wouldn't want to name it, we could describe it in that SDI. And then we might have increased instructional intensity. So maybe our learners need more practice with some of those rote things. They just need more of that drill. It's just, we've got to drill, drill, drill. Maybe they just need more steps. So some of our learners who might be more concrete, or our learners who may struggle with that short-term working memory piece, they might need more steps listed just because they're struggling, pulling all of those ideas out of their heads, or maybe they need more review. I see we have a question. Any suggestions where to get strategies for teaching math using various methods? So Alana or Nikki, correct me if I'm wrong, but we have that later, right?
We have a resource for you. Yes, there's a slide with the resource on there that has interventions, like Intervention Central. I haven't looked up specifically all of the things, but yes, there's some resources for you. And if not, we can take that question and we can find you we can definitely find you that.
And it might help us too, Rachel, if we know like what exact, like not exact math, but like, are you elementary, middle school? Oh, Nikki put in there, are you willing to share? Yeah, so I think that might help us to also guide you. Currently 5th grade. Okay. And I know too, Alana's going to take over here shortly. And when I get to your slide, Alana, cut me off because I can't see slide numbers. But we can also do some digging for you, and we're always happy to share those resources later if we don't have them right now for you. So when we look at the purpose of specially designed instruction, it's the things that we mentioned earlier. It is to address the unique needs that result from the child's disability. Accommodations are not specially designed instruction. So small group testing is not SDI. Classroom tools are not specially designed instruction. So a calculator is not SDI. It could be used in SDI, and we'll talk about how. But just the use of a calculator is not specially designed instruction. It's really to ensure that access of the child to that general education curriculum. Because remember, our students are expected to meet those standards, not just be exposed to them. So we have to ensure that they have access to those. The general education classroom is going to provide the best place for students to get that general education curriculum, because as amazing and wonderful as special education teachers are, they're not always the content specialist. And so it is just so important that we let that content specialist, be the one who's delivering that content. I could go into any English class and feel comfortable with a group of special education students and do English lessons on just about anything. But if I had to do math, I would do the students a disservice, I feel like, because I wouldn't be able I just don't have that knowledge base, that curriculum understanding of math in order to teach it to really any student. And again, it's about meeting those educational standards. It's not just about exposing them to the standard. And one of my favorite quotes from this Anne Benninghoff book that is cited at the bottom of the slide is that you can't teach a child to swim by taking them out of the pool. We have to leave them in the pool to learn. But you know what? We can give them a life jacket. We can give them specially designed instruction to keep them to be able to meet the same standard. They can swim, they just may need the extra support. All right, so these 3 bullet points rather come from the Progress Center. Some of them are kind of repeats of things that we have mentioned, just in different wording. And I love that so many different places are sharing the same pieces of information to us, because that really lets us know that this is what best practices are. SDI is not an accommodation, but teaching the students how to use the accommodation is a form of SDI. So like I said, a calculator is not SDI, but teaching a student how to use a calculator is. And, and the calculator doesn't pop up as an accommodation until 6th grade, I believe. Yes, okay. So, if you're teaching 6th grade and you give your student a calculator, we can't just assume that they know how to use it. They're going to need to be taught. Now, it might not take a year to learn a 4-function calculator, but it might take longer if it's like a scientific calculator and the student needs to know how to use that calculator in order to take a math class. SDI is not a specific intervention program, but an intervention program may be used as part of the design of SDI. So again, just naming an intervention strategy is not SDI, which is why I guide you not to do it, but rather explain the strategy. That way we know it's SDI. And then third, specially designed instruction is not differentiated instruction or universal design for learning. So going back to the slide that Niki shared with us of just kind of all those little bullseyes and rings inside of each other, those are just layers. So it's not just differentiated instruction or UDL that is accessible to all students, but SDI may and should, honestly, draw on those practices within the instructional design to address the unique needs of the child that results from their disability. So those are very important things to consider, and the Progress Center has some wonderful resources as well.
I'm so sorry. I can't hear you guys at all of a sudden. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh, okay. And you guys could hear Katie?
yes.
And you're ready for me to move on the slide.
Yes.
So sorry. It just went silent on me for a second. Sorry about that. I saw you staring.
So again, what SDI is not. In education, we always like to define behaviors and say what it is, but we also like to say what it is not. And we very directly say what it is not. And so we're going to do the same with SDI. Again, it is not differentiation. It is not universal design for learning. It is not homework help. It's not content support. It's not accommodations. It's not modifications. It's about teaching. And so we have to keep that in mind. And all of the decisions that we make about SDI are based on our students' disability. So that's why those data meetings are so important in those ACRs and initial evaluations. All of that data helps to drive this SDI. So oftentimes in education, we kind of pigeonhole ourselves and think in just very specific terms. We always think of SDI in terms of academic needs, but it can be so much more. So here are some different areas where we can consider possible SDI domains. So we've got that organizational piece. So we know a lot of our students with executive function disorders are diagnosed with ADHD, so we might have some things here. We've got all of those behavior interventions that we can do with our students, and we've got some great resources to find those interventions. Student well-being, communication, and yes, Alana said we can write goals for all of these things, yes. Functional, physical areas, motor areas, sensory, vocational, and technological. And so these all come from some resources from Marilyn Friend. And I believe we have those resources in the Padlet for you as well. So just some different areas to think about. And when we ask ourselves, how do I know it's SDI? How do I know what I'm doing is specially designed instruction? Well, remember, and I don't think we mentioned this, but it's special. So it's something that the other children aren't getting. It's designed, so it is something that is created and it is actually being instructed. So it has to be all three of those things. But it's also documented in the IEP. And I kind of mentioned this already when I talked about, I can't remember what it was earlier, but I mentioned this, that it has to align with a goal in that IEP, and it's designed to reflect that goal. It has to be research or evidence-based, and it has to be teacher-led. So when we get that instruction piece, when we talk about the I, that's where that comes in. It's systematic instruction. So it's planned based on data that we have acquired from the student, and it's delivered over time. So we look at our students' IEPs a year at a time. So we're looking at, what can the student accomplish? How can they grow? What can they master in a year time? It's documented, so we're keeping track of it. We're actually progress monitoring on it, and we're reporting that progress monitoring. And then we evaluate it based on what the data tells us. Is it instruction that's needed by the student with a disability? If it's not needed by the student, then it's not going to be SDI. It's going to address the learning or the other deficit. So it may not just be an academic deficit, it might be a behavior deficit that prevent the student from reaching the grade level standard. So whatever that barrier is, that's what we want to address. And we really want to look at transferring that skill and maintenance. Can the student maintain it when we're not working on it every day? Okay, so here is just a fun little question that we have. Is this SDI? So is this specially designed instruction, or is it best practice, and why? So we're not going to judge the goals in this. We're just using an example here. Matt will initiate task when verbally directed by teacher or staff. Okay, so there's my goal. So here's the you tell me, specially designed instruction or best practice. Special education teacher provides services 3 times per week. When she is present, she makes eye contact with Matt before repeating the teacher's verbal instruction. She models how to start the routine and verbally praises him when he begins. She circulates around the classroom, but checks in on Matt more than other students. What do you think? Is it best practice or is it specially designed instruction? And so as we think about an answer to this question, we might ask ourselves, is it specific to a goal? And then we might ask ourselves, is this tailored to Matt's unique needs? Is it evidence-based? Do we have evidence of progress monitoring? Anyone want to throw a guess in the chat?
There's a few responses in the chat, Katie.
Okay. Oh, okay. So best practice, best practice. He's definitely being cared for by a kind teacher. Yes, but we're missing other aspects. Nikki, what do you think? Or I just kind of put you on the spot there. Oh my gosh.
No, I definitely think it's a best practice because he is being cared for by a really kind teacher who's checking in on him and doing all of those things. But that I don't see any of the things that you mentioned, like collecting the data or really teaching him something in particular. I would have loved to see Matt be specifically taught how to, instead of her just checking on him, maybe how to show that he needs help, how to have a response card or raise his hand, those kinds of things. So I was looking for instruction and it wasn't there.
Yes, I love that because making eye contact is great. It really is. But we can make eye contact and inside we're not really connecting much. So I like that you mentioned that. Okay, and I know we have one more example, but in the best interest of time, and I know we have several slides left, I think we'll skip the next example.
Okay, so my part is who can provide SDI? So Katie asked earlier who was general education and who was special education. So we have, I think I saw just special education in there. But if Nikki goes to the next slide, we're going to talk about who can legally provide SDI. So it is a shared responsibility. Oftentimes, as a special education teacher, you feel like you are responsible for that, right? Because you have to progress monitor, you have to make sure that's in the IEP. But really, general education teachers and the special education teachers are both able to provide specially designed instruction. Um, Oftentimes, I think a long time ago, maybe, students were being pulled into that resource class, and then the special education teachers were kind of saying that's when they deliver their SDI. But now that more students are maybe in the general education, it's good that we're having these trainings for everybody, because you're allowed to deliver SDI if you're a special education teacher, general education teacher, and if you were me, I had 3 paraprofessionals in my classroom. So they are able to do that with me in my class. So under my direction as a special education teacher, or general education teacher, a paraprofessional could help you with that too. So if you guys do stations in your class for those elementary, or if you have paras that help in your class, they're able to provide that specially designed instruction as well. So it's legally they are able to. So if you show them exactly how to do something with a student, say if you're doing U-Fly, or if you have something that you think that once they watch you enough times, that you're able to do that as well, they're able to help you with that as well in a station, then you can definitely get them involved in delivering that specially designed instruction. Katie talked about using a calculator. They can help you teach students how to use that calculator. That would be their SDI. So paraprofessionals are very helpful into building up those skills. Yes, Rachel, I'm glad you're happy to know that. So that is great. Bring them in. They'll be happy to bring those things in with you. So it does start with present levels. We know that present levels should have a direct relationship between the present levels of performance and the other components of the IEP. We call it the golden thread. It has to be all together. It has to align and make sense. The statement describes a problem with the child's reading level and the points of deficiency in the reading skills. The problem should be addressed under both goals and specific special education and related services provided to the child. So if a student is working on a reading goal, we need to teach them a skill to help or a strategy to help with getting to that goal. And it really should be in present levels. The student needs to learn how to use that snap and read or a specific program because they're not able to read on grade level. That would be the part that you would put in that present level. And then maybe you're going to have a skill or you're going to have a goal around that skill of reading. So that specially designed instruction, you're going to teach them how to use that snap and read or something to have access to those accommodations so that they can reach that goal. So all of those baseline data should be in that present levels. That's where we start with our specially designed instruction. So planning for SDI. So how do we plan? How do we do this? How do we plan for SDI? This is a lot. And actually, Katie, Nikki, and I have all we have a whole day training on specially designed instruction. So this is just a quick thing. But prior to planning SDI, we have to determine what evidence exists for any proposed instructional technique that establishes its effectiveness considering the student's unique needs. So what does that mean? That means if you have students in your class that have autism, a lot of times they need those visuals, right? Because based on their autism, they are maybe concrete learners. So you can consider their disability. So I use touch math a lot because that was concrete. Just like Katie said, I didn't put touch math in the IEP, but the student needed to use those visuals to complete those math work because they had autism and they did better with some of those concrete evidence-based practices. So when you think about that, you have to think about what evidence-based practices do you use in your classroom based on some of these things, based on their disability with their unique needs, their age, their setting, their subject area, and their specific skills. So what skills are we trying to focus on? And that's when we can, and I think that Maggie put that in the chat. We're going to talk about that resource later, that you can find those evidence-based instruction to match what the student needs based on those specific skills and the subject area. Some students, like Katie mentioned, need help with math, but they don't need help with reading. They might not have SDI in reading. They might just have SDI in that math. So we really have to make sure that we are teaching those skills that the student needs from that. And we're going to give you a little bit of resources later for that SDI. So SDI is intended to address the student's IEP's goals. So we said it has to match a goal. It is instruction tailored for them and adjusted as needed that enables them to reach those goals. But special educators should also understand the characteristics of their students that will shape all instruction. So as I said, my student that needed to use those visuals for math to reach her goal, she needs to use those visuals in all the subjects because she's more of a concrete learner. She needed those manipulatives. I knew that she had to have those touch points. So that's how they're going to learn all of their instruction. That's just the way that their preferred instruction is based on their disability. So we know that we're using this to get them to their goals, but the more we can incorporate this, it's going to help them get in every subject. It's going to help them. We know if they're concrete learners in reading and math, we have to decide and pick some strategies that will help them. So that's how you plan for your specially designed instruction. And we really have to collaborate with that general education teacher so that we can work together to reach those goals with that student. We provide scaffolds for learning. If you've been to any of our other trainings, we had a whole training on scaffolds. Scaffolds are temporary supports to help students complete tasks they are not yet able to do independently. They can be visual, verbal, and written. In my classroom, I used a lot of visual supports, a lot of supports that you guys use these too, I'm sure. Sometimes you had to use pictures so students could remember the steps of things. They're aligned specifically with what students needs. We plan ahead. We have support ideas in mind ahead of time so that they are handy when the student needs arises. If you have too many if you have too many directions, I know that these students are only going to need 2 directions at a time. I'm going to give them 1 direction and then 2 directions, and I'm going to come back and give them direction 3 and 4. I need to scaffold that. I need to chunk it because I know my students that can't remember all of those things in order. Maybe my students with those executive functioning skills that have a hard time with that. I'm only going to give them one thing to do at a time. I'm going to take a big worksheet. I'm going to take one strip off and I'm going to have them do 5 problems first. And then I'm going to give them the next part. And then I'm going to give them the next part because I know that they're going to shut down if I give them a whole 20 problems because they're not going to want to do it like that. So as a special education teacher, I have to plan scaffolds for students before something happens. I have to know that that's how they learn. So that those are some of the things that as a special education teacher, if you're in a co-taught setting, that's what you could think about for those providing scaffolds for learning with those students. What can you do to help that student in that gen ed setting if that's where they are? And one way is scaffolds. Those are really, really important and helpful for our kids. Here's some strategies that we already have. So if you want to pre-plan some of these and you can help to spot with a task, you can have flexible and numerous strategies. Maybe you can put them in a toolbox on your computer and have some of these things because you're going to have some students with some unique needs, maybe some of the similar needs, but you should maybe work out some problems with the math steps or any steps and leave it on the board while the students work through their problems. So you can have a model in front of them or next to them on their desk, either way, how that works. So they could see something worked all the way through. If they have a problem, they get stuck, they can look back on their notes and they can have that there. Not all students will need it, but it's not going to hurt anybody. But our students with some of these specially designed instruction, they need that so that you can teach them how to go back into their notes and look at that. And that is a good strategy to have. The teacher can list the steps or the prompts of each problem so students can complete the multi-step problems. I did this a lot of times. I co-taught in science class. We needed to know the scientific method, the first, second, third, and fourth. We wanted them to remember that. So what do you do first? And I would have it next to them on cards so that they can refer back to those because those multi-step problems are really hard for them to remember. So you really writing those out and having them next to those students is very helpful for that strategy for those kids. And thinking about any of your math problems or any of your English or any subject has steps to do some problem solving steps. Anytime you can write those out and give those to your students, that is a good strategy to use. The teacher teaching students how to use the graphic organizers to take notes in science. Oftentimes I've saw in classrooms that students would have to take notes, closed notes, or they would just have to take notes, but they didn't know the purpose of why they're using those notes or how to take notes or how to abbreviate or what to put into they're just copying it from the board, but you have to teach the skill of how to take notes and how to use a graphic organizer, both of those things. So it's the how and why we're doing that. That is especially design instruction, not just giving all the students a graphic organizer because that's an accommodation. Every student can just have a graphic organizer, but taking that 5 minutes and pulling those students and saying, this is how you use a graphic organizer. What graphic organizer do you think that you could use in this classroom? What makes sense to your brain? Here's the different organizers. What do you think that you would like to try? And then the student tries it, and then you go back and reflect and say, did that work for you? If it didn't, we're going to try something else. So it's not just giving the student these accommodations, these graphic organizers or these closed notes, but you're really having those conversations with these kids to say, is this helping you? This is why we're doing this. Let me practice. Let me show you how I do it. I want to see how you do it. So you're transferring that skill to the student. It's going to be you doing something with the student. That is specially designed instruction. You're teaching the student how, why, to do all of these things. And then they're going to reflect and say, is that working for me? And if it's not, we're going to try something different. That is specially designed instruction. I think earlier it said you have to adapt how you're teaching it. So if it's not working for them, how could we change it so that we can work specifically for those students? So that's because all of us are different. We all like to take notes differently. We all like to do things differently. And our students are the same. Just because I like to use a T-chart, maybe my student wants to use something else, and that's okay. It's just teaching them to advocate for what they need for their brain. And that would be part of the SDI. And again, I'm talking a lot. So if you guys have any questions or if you have any ideas, please put that in the chat. And then the last part is the SDI process. And we have, Katie kind of already talked about a lot of these things. The direct explicit instruction with John Hattie. If you guys haven't looked him up, I think that would be a good resource for you to look up. because he does talk about the steps very specifically in the order, and Katie did talk about this. I think the thing that's different on this one as before is we talk about generalization and maintenance. So I had a student that I knew that learned touch math when she was in second grade. I often use her because when she got to me in sixth grade, I did not use touch math anymore, but she would still know where the dots were when we were trying to do like multiplication. She would still like know what they were. So I knew that she had maintenance because she used it since she was in second grade. She got to me in sixth grade, and I didn't have to do that anymore because she kind of knew how to do it on her own. That's how she thought. She thought in concrete. She thought in visuals. That helped her out. And generalization is when I pull a student and I'm going to do progress monitoring on a goal, they can do it with me, but can they do that in their general education class? I'm going to teach them how to use a graphic organizer in the resource classroom. We're going to use it with me, but when they go to general education, are they able to use it on their own? Are they able to take what you taught them and use it in their class, in their other classes? That is the process. That's when we know that SDI works, right? We're going to teach them something. They're going to be able to use it on they're going to take it. They're going to be able to use it on their own, and then they're going to use it throughout the whole, all of their classes. That is how we know the process of SDI is going to go. Direct explicit instruction, again, this is the gradual release model, John Hattie's work and Anita Archer. We talk about direct explicit instruction. I'm going to do something, I'm going to model it, I'm going to model the strategy. If you're getting upset, I'm going to model that first. When you get upset, I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm gonna model how to use different breathing techniques, and we're gonna do it together. You and I are gonna practice this together, and then I'm gonna have you do this on your own, and we're gonna review it. We're gonna keep doing that over and over. I want to also stress, especially with behavior, when you're teaching those skills about behavior for especially design instruction, make sure you're teaching it when students aren't already upset. So we need to practice this when they're calm, because they have to take that tool when they're upset. And if you're trying to do this with them when they're already upset, it's not going to work. I saw Katie shaking her head. She knows with those executive functioning skills. So we have to practice. So the SDI is that you're going to practice this in my classroom when students are calm, when they're not upset. We're going to maybe role play. You did something that makes me upset, or another student did something. What are we going to do? So I'm going to practice modeling it. I'm going to have us practice together, and I'm going to have you do it on your own. When they're able to take that skill, when somebody really does make them upset and they start using those tools without you, that's when we know that special design instruction is working for those behavior goals. So I think that sometimes we try to do this when kids are already up here in their brains. They're kind of getting up there, and it's really hard to diffuse that. So we have to teach these strategies when it's in the calm. And I've seen that a lot with the behavior. We do that with academics, but the behavior one is the one that I always try to stress with, especially in design instruction, because these students need these coping mechanisms and these coping skills, are advocating for themselves, are asking for help. But we have to do that when they don't need those things, so that when they do need those things, they can access that part. Does that make sense? Does anyone want to add anything, you guys? Yeah, okay. So, and kind of about this, the self-regulatory strategy development, we talk about why we need this strategy. We're going to discuss whatever strategy that you're going to do. You're going to model the strategy. You're going to memorize the strategy, which Katie talked about PEMDAS. So we're going to have that background knowledge of PEMDAS. We're going to discuss when we use it. I'm going to model it on the board. I'm gonna memorize the strategy. You're gonna memorize the strategy. You're gonna repeat it back to me as many possible times as we can. I'm gonna support that strategy by giving you a list next to your desk. It's gonna have PEMDAS a million times, so that you can see it if you forget. And then I'm gonna see if you can do it on your own. I'm gonna see if you can do it in your algebra class, in your math class. You're gonna transfer and do the independent performance. I'm gonna collect an exit slip. I'm going to see if you can do it on your own. That would be how I would try to do that progress monitoring for that goal. If you're going to do, order of operations, and that's how I'm taking the goal. So really, this is any strategy would work if you're going to do a self-regulated strategy or you're going to do an academic. So I kind of went through that breathing one. But if you're getting upset, those are kinds of things. And they're right here. Teaching students how to breathe when they get upset. Teaching students how to ask for help when they get stuck on a task. Again, before they get stuck on that task and shut down, we need to practice these SDI skills before those things happen. Teaching students how to use their visual schedule to make choices when they need a break. So we're going to practice. We're gonna have those kids ask you for lots of breaks at first. It's going to dwindle down to when they really need it. But when you're first teaching a strategy, you're going to probably use it a lot more often. And then when they truly need it in the end, then we're gonna back it off. But we really want them to be able to practice that as much as possible when you first teach a new strategy to those students. And then teaching students how to use break cards when they need one. I'm sure, has anybody used those in your classroom? That's a really important one. I need a reset, I need a break. Even if you think that they're kind of using it often, you still have to do it. You still have to give them those as much as possible. And eventually we're gonna tame it down to see when they really need it, because we don't know when they need it sometimes. We're just practicing that skill. So SDI is showing them how to do all of these things and practicing with them. It should be taught when students do not need it, so they can access the strategy when they need it. Does anybody use any of these and practice these SDIs in their building? If you want to put it in the chat, what strategies do you use? Do you have anything that has any specific name on it? I don't know of any. I'm trying to think off the top of my head any specific strategies that have names, but I know there's a lot of different breathing zones of regulation is one sometimes schools use. They talk about breathing, talk about colors. If you're in the red color, yellow color, or green, box breathing. Katie uses. I knew there was names, but I keep forgetting. Champs is a great one. Have you guys heard of those? Front loading and schedule and expectations. Yep. And they always have some sort of acronym sometimes because you have to remember the steps, right? You have to remember the steps of the order, even as we get to be an adult. But students with learning disabilities or students with executive functioning and maybe lower memory skills have to have those mnemonic devices. They have to have a way to recall those steps. So it's good for all kids, but some kids have to have it delivered that way. That is specially designed instruction. Thank you. All right. And then maintenance, we kind of talked, how do we know that it's going to be there once it's been presented? Well, we have to progress monitor. We have to check back for maintenance. Sometimes we're like, okay, they're doing great with this skill. We're gonna be done with this skill. They went to the next IEP, but maybe we need to keep some maintenance data to make sure that they're still using those coping techniques. So you just make sure that you know what students are generalizing that, when they're using that. It's more effective. It can be embedded across settings and situations. If I can use a graphic organizer in social studies and ELA and maybe other classrooms, it's going to help me because it adjusts all the settings. We can adjust the antecedent to see in maintenance. Like I said, sometimes students are able to do a skill with you in a small group, but when they get in a bigger group, it's harder for them. So can we make it the rigor harder by adding more people in that group? That could be something that you could do for maintenance. And gathering data, making sure that we know that the student has the skill. How do we know it? I always say data or it didn't happen. We have to take that data to see if the students reach that threshold of what we want them to reach, or it didn't happen. Here is what I think Maggie put in this before. Or did she? Yeah, you put in a resource. Thank you very much. And then there's What Works Clearinghouse is another SDI strategy, a place that has strategies for that. One of them is cover, copy, compare. So this is just a recall strategy that you can use. Katie already talked about chaining and backward chaining, so I'm not going to go over that one again. But cover, copy, compare is just say that you have 7 plus 4. So it says 7 plus 4, you're trying to go quickly with those. So 7 plus 4, then the student writes down 7 plus 4 equals 11 after they see it. And then they're going to cover it over, and then they're going to do 7 plus 4 from memory equals 11. Or you could do that with vocabulary. And just so that you can try to retrieve that really quickly, you're going to look at it first, and then you're going to try to copy it, and you're going to compare and see if you got right or wrong, whether it's working with spelling or working with math facts. That is just a strategy that you can use. Chaining and backward chaining, Katie talked about that really well. And then this is another place that you can look for strategies if you want to get that SDI paired with the student's disability. It is in, I think she put the NCII, and this one is another resource as well. And we're not going to stop and take a minute because in our full day we would, but right now we don't. So we're going to have another case study to kind of end on today. I want you to consider the information provided and decide which of Jose's goals you would address first. Determine the steps to take when planning specially designed instruction. Discuss options for SDI, the content methodology, and or instructional design. How would you monitor progress? And thinking about the root cause and the skills chart for reading comprehension, which it's in the Padlet. We're not going to go over this right now, but really we're just going to look at this case study and see what goals would we address of Jose's? What skill are we going to try to teach him to align it with that specially designed instruction? So here is Jose. He's in 5th grade. The focus is comprehension. Jose is a new student in the 5th grade. It is April, and this is the 3rd school Jose has been in this year. Jose adapts well to change, has a positive attitude towards school, and appears to have made friends at his new school. Jose does well in math and enjoys science and social studies. In the area of reading, Jose is able to easily decode unfamiliar words and reads with good expression. However, in the area of comprehension, Jose has difficulty answering questions that require reasoning and total understanding of the story. Jose also has difficulty identifying the main components of the story. Jose's teacher, Miss Lundy, states that although he enjoys reading and does not seem to be frustrated, he will not ask for help when needed. Thus, his reading grade is beginning to suffer. Miss Lundy has the following instructional goals for Jose. Again, we're not going to judge our goals. It's just kind of for this purpose. Given a reading passage on its instructional level, Jose will answer inferential and evaluative comprehension questions. Given a reading passage on his instructional level, Jose will recall the main story elements. So, what skills do you think that we should be able to teach Jose? What strategies do you think that we could use? Or what skills do you think that Jose needs in order to reach these goals? And if you don't think, and if you want to change the goals at the bottom, you could do that as well. But what are some things that we need to teach Jose? What's his deficits? What skills do we need to address with that special design instruction? I'm going to give you a second to think because that's a lot of words I just said. Maybe first I would say what's his deficits? What are the things that he can work on? Maybe that would be the first thing that I would ask myself when I was looking at this. Katie said recalling information. I don't know if you guys have had any students like this, but I've had students who could read on grade level, but their comprehension was not at grade level. I don't know if anybody else has had this. So recalling information would be something that you think. Anybody else have anything? He has a couple of things in here that says maybe a couple of skills that we think that we could maybe work on. Nikki says explicit instruction, having examples, non-examples, how to infer main idea. And then Rachel said staying focused. So she went an executive functioning way, which is that you can go any way. Yep. Katie says needs content chunked. Yeah, so when you're looking at a passage and you're thinking about specially designed instruction, you're thinking about what skills the student needs to work on. And you guys said recall, and I've had students like this, that they could read really well, Somebody actually, and her disability, she had autism, but she could read really well, but she didn't know what she was reading. Like she couldn't tell me what it was about. And this is what it sounds like with Jose. He's able to decode words, all the kinds of words, but he doesn't know what was read. He also, it says that he enjoys reading and does not seem to be frustrated, but he will not ask for help when needed. So if you could also talk about the skill of asking for help. So those are two things that he would maybe need. Maybe he doesn't know how to ask for help. You could write a goal around special design instruction for that. And then you guys use some strategies that you can chunk. I used to have a student, a different student, that at the end of each paragraph, I put a post-it after each end of each paragraph, and I would ask a question about what they just read. So they'd have to stop, or I would say, draw a picture of the main character. After every one, I would adjust on that student's paper. She would know that the post-it, that's what I had to do. I either had a prompt or, and I taught in middle school, a picture prompt or a question that I asked about it, or who was the main character, because she could read beautifully, but the comprehension wasn't there. So I had to teach her how to stop and think about her words. And I had to put that scaffold for her in the gen ed setting. When she was in general education, I would take her work and I would chunk it like that. And she knew every time that there would be a post-it that she'd have to answer a question, or every time there was a longer chapter, she'd have to answer a question or draw a picture. That was just something that I did to help her with the comprehension. And it sounds like that's a skill that I taught her how to do and how to use. After every paragraph, she had to stop and ask a question. And then the SDI would be me teaching her how to do that and doing that for herself so she could slow down her reading, because then she could answer a comprehension question. So that would be the SDI, but that's exactly how you would do that with Jose. What is their strengths? We know the strengths. And then what are their stretches? What do we need to help them with? And this one is comprehension. And this says at the bottom, it says answer inferential and evaluate comprehension questions. But those, we know that inferencing is harder sometimes than those right there questions, right? So I would work on that right there questions first. And then if you got there, then you can maybe move on to that inferencing. So thinking about that, what are those skills that they need? Which one is maybe the easiest to more complex? And how can we teach those two things? So yes, you could pick up staying focused. You could pick asking a question. What's the main barrier that Jose is not doing well in that reading class? So pick something from that to make sense. And that's how you align it with SDI. And all this information goes from the present levels, but more data in the present levels, because this is a present level without that much data. So more data in that present levels, figuring out some goals, figuring out what STI you're going to use for that student, and how you're going to teach them that skill to do that as we're wrapping all this up. So that is basically it. Yep, highlight important information within the passage, Rachel. Thank you. Perfect. It's a great accommodation that you can teach them how to do. That would be STI, teaching them how to do that. That's great. And that's a great strategy for you to help with as a special education teacher. So thank you. You can move on. Sorry, Nikki. That was a good thought, Rachel. Thank you. So let's practice what makes it SDI. So here's an example: direct instruction in using Braille versus Braille. The Braille is an accommodation. The direct instruction in how to use Braille is SDI. Teaching students how to use specific reading strategy is SDI. Highlighting passages in the text, if you're just doing it yourself, then that is just a great accommodation for the teacher, the special education teacher or general education teacher, to do for her student. But if you're teaching the student how to do it themselves, then that is specially designed instruction. Direct instruction on how to use a graphic organizer. I talked about this a lot. Which organizer is good for your brain? How do we use it? Which one are we going to use? That is SDI. Just graphic organizers for all the students. That is an accommodation. And then Katie talked about this, teaching students how to use a calculator, SDI. You're going to pull your paraprofessionals and you're going to say, you guys are going to use the number chart with this para. You're going to teach them how to use this. That's a great use of your paraprofessionals to teach some of these SDI throughout the day. You're going to teach them how to do these breathing techniques. You're going to teach all of these things. That is SDI. Just giving them a calculator and just having that in their IEP, that's an accommodation. So that's what's different about it. It's the direct instruction of the teacher to the student. And then just the accommodations everybody can have. You don't have to have an IEP to use a graphic organizer or a calculator or highlighting the passages. Those are just best practices. So making sure that we know that SDI has that instruction in it, has that I in there, that's what makes it SDI. And I think that's the last slide is SDI is a balance between the standards to which all students are held and the unique learning needs of students with disabilities. It is at the very heart of what makes special education unique and must be carefully planned, implemented with fidelity, and assessed to determine its impact on student outcome. So it makes special education special, and those students have to have it legally. We have to deliver it legally. So that is really what SDI is in the heart of it. I believe that is all. Does anybody have any questions, any specific questions, or anyone, Nikki and Katie, want to add anything else, or anybody else? All of the content we had today for you, and now it started raining.
I know Anita Archer always says, keep the teach and teacher. And that's always kind of the heart for me of SDI is making sure I'm teaching everything, not just leaving it out there for students to do or putting it on them, making sure there's clear instruction on those things I want my students to take away. Yeah.
I like that. Anybody
Right.
else? If you wouldn't mind filling out an evaluation for us, you're going to get your PGP points after today. And those are some books that we really like for SDI. If you wanted to look at those, are in there. But I appreciate you guys being here. It's I Learn season, which is hard. But if you wouldn't mind just doing our evaluation on the left, I would appreciate that. And thank you guys for being here. And if you have any questions, please unmute. We're here for a couple of minutes. We have like 8 minutes.